So if something comes up that says, do you want to tag your friends? Yes, and I just tag everybody.
Okay. Okay.
But we're going to get started.
Okay.
So, welcome. Local collectives.
We should close those drapes.
November edition. I don't know if I can. Let's see. Better?
I'm sure.
Okay, so where were we? It is our November gathering for the JOCO Collective, still on the theme of solidarity, and specifically looking at the issue of birthplace and birthright, as we want to have a substantive discussion about the benefits and if there are any, and the disadvantages of what we have identified as micronationalism in the movement for Black empowerment, deeply and globally. I should say about JOCO that the idea is to sort of be a critical, I can't find the right method I'm looking for, but we want to critically engage the various theories, ideas, movements, information that circulates through the Black community, through the national Black community, local Black communities, global Black community, family. Particularly some of those theories that have been identified as signs of consciousness, awareness of what's really going on, and therefore useful in our total liberation. JOCO is a place to test those ideas, to engage their sources, to deliberate on what is their real value. So we're picking up with this birthplace and birthright so that we can go and wonder aloud about whether our various nationalisms are serving us, or is internationalism the way to go for the global African family. We've been at this now, I think this is our third month on the topic. So just for a quick review, these are primarily issues of the modern period, modernity, the falling away of traditional social relations, traditional cultural values, traditional relationships to land, to others, precipitated primarily by the emergence of Europe into its modern era. The emergence of Europe out of Europe in crisis in the 15th century, as it then begins to remake itself and rebuild itself, invading the Americas, Asia, the islands of the South Pacific. That is the history of modernity. Europe expanding, invading, and the de-evolution of the societies of the global South. This modern period is characterized by nationalism. And I'm going to have a seat. Characterized by nationalism. And you know, what we call nationalism begins to emerge probably in the 15th century as the various monarchies of Europe, including the Ottoman Empire, or what will soon become the Ottoman Empire, began to coalesce power around a central monarch as the competing interests in those societies are unable to sustain their claims to power, the throne. And what begins to emerge is the notion of a national identity. And that's typically been identified as a people who identify as having a common language, a common history, a common culture, and a psychological sense of sameness. But it also has emerged as a form of the state, and most nations of the world exist as what we call nation states. And within the nation state, ethnicity is in some ways submerged around the idea of a common nationality, a common English nationality, for example, or a common French nationality, a common Russian nationality that begins to emerge. And then, in response to these emerging European nationalities, those of us in the global south begin to form our own ideas of nation in contradistinction to the European national identities. Although I think it's important to remember the nation state, right? It's a form of the state, a form of, a form of control by the ruling class. In this case, as it emerges in the modern period, the period of the nation state, the international bourgeoisie. You have local bourgeoisies and international bourgeoisies, and put it simply, that's the ownership class, right? Those who have made a claim on owning the means of production, the resources for the raw materials, the means of production, etc. So these things emerge at the same time. However, there are nations or people that identify as nations and that have that self-identification accepted, who are stateless people. So, in recent news out of Syria, Iraq, and Turkey, right? There is the Kurdish nation, which is a stateless nation. Kurds are part of the Syrian state, part of the Iraqi state, part of the Iranian state, part of the Turkish. They have, formed their own states that has been frustrated by these various powers, as well as the imperial powers who have played them off against each other. You could look at the Palestinian people as a stateless people. Some folks might say the Palestinian Authority represents a state for them, but that's really questionable. And I have at least one colleague who thinks that we here, Americans, should be identified as a stateless nation. We are certainly citizens of a country. Our rights and privileges as citizens in no way regularly protected, and in fact we are in constant battle to have those rights upheld. Even our lives, right, are not safe. So if you don't have the protection of the state, and in fact it is more often than not state agents who are the murderers, you might as well be a stateless people. That's a question that can be discussed. This notion of micronationalism really emerges in the post-independence period, as now you have new nations of Africa, new nations in the South Pacific, eventually emerging in the 19th century into the 20th century in Latin America. But these nations are defined by borders drawn by the imperial powers, including here in the Americas. And so in terms of those criteria for what constitutes a nation, common language, common history, common culture, and a sense of sameness gets complicated because of the way those lines have been drawn. And then who are those lines drawn to serve? A country, how many people live in the United States? Something like 500 million, 300 million, something like that. How can a country like Ethiopia even, the second or third most populous country in Africa, it's under 20 million people. A country like Namibia may only have 2 million people. How can they withstand the powers of these massive superstates? And particularly as their economies remain tied to the imperial system. I was just recently reading a statement from, I believe he's the Prime Minister of Barbuda and Antigua. And he was talking about the 200,000 people, right, citizens of the country. Now, I believe there are at least that many black people in Los Angeles, right? So this is what we mean by micronations. And, what resistance can that economy have to, a massive economy? How can these folks defend themselves against a mass invasion? And so, for some, and many Western progressives in particular, have theorized nationalism as really a pathology of modernity. But for those who have had to struggle against the imperial powers, there's recognition of the revolutionary possibilities of nationalism and the need to get the foreign power up off of our throats, right? To create some kind of political independence, and so there are the possibilities for a nationalism that isn't predatory, though it's perfectly clear. Nationalism, as it has emerged in the modern world, that is, European nationalism, has been predatory. It has been, it is a result of empire, invasion, colonization, settlement, enslavement, etc. And in that process, the European nations emerge. The idea of Europe emerges. Previously, they referred to themselves as Christendom. It's only in the modern period that they began to develop an identity as, the English nation, the French nation, the Italian nation, etc. Because of the idea of nationalism as fundamentally pathological that some people hold, the idea of a borderless world has emerged, right? That, who do the borders serve? There isn't anything about the borders that keeps capital from flowing back and forth. And of course, the super elites can go where they want. The borders are strictly about controlling the flow of labor and managing the flow of goods and services. But again, to whose interest? Not the interest of the vast majority of humanity, but the interest of elites. The nation state cannot be seen, and it should not be seen, as divorced from economy. So I wanted to review the idea of economy. And you see up on the wall over there the definitions from the last JOCO where we discussed that. Political economy is the science that deals with the laws governing the production and distribution of the material means of subsistence in society, that is, all resources, human and natural resources. The study of in the society, the production and trade of their relationship with law, government, custom, and trade. Our presenters on political economy highlighted the point that the idea of political economy arises out of discourses of moral philosophy in the Western discourse of modernity, right? As these folks are trying to explain their emergence. In a country like the United States that operates on the illusion that there is a distinction between politics and economy, economy is only taught, right? And this idea, the idea of value-free, meaning no moral judgments, right? It has nothing to do with moral philosophy. It is somehow beyond that. Just has to do with goods and services, the free hand of the market, this sort of thing. But that is an illusion. Economy always serves the political, and the political always serves the economic. And so we insist on recognizing that by using the phrase political economy, the political economy of the United States, the political economy of Hollywood, right? The political economy of tourism, whatever the sector of the political economy may be, rather than give into that illusion of the economic over here, illusion of the separation of spheres. Politics, economy have nothing to do with each other, when in fact they're imbricated and indicated and implied and interdependent and all that, right? Now, the political economy is a capitalist political economy. Capitalism itself, hundreds of years old, has gone through various phases, beginning with the mercantilist phase in that early period that is euphemistically called in Western history books the Age of Discovery, but should be properly called the Age of Invasion, right? Columbus and the criminals who followed him. The vast amounts of wealth that come into Europe from the Americas, from Africa, because really, we can't start, well, Columbus is also indicated in it, but really what we should be thinking about the Portuguese king in the 1450s on the coast of Africa, right, before they even come over to the Americas. So this wealth that is coming into Europe, that's beginning to transform the economies of Europe, this emerging class, the townspeople, the burghers, or the bourgeois, who are not nobles, but since the beginning of the building of the cathedrals in the European cities in the late Middle Ages, this class, it's the reemergence of urban life in Western Europe. And this is the class of people, artisans, merchants, who sort of get a hold of that economic process, so that by the time Isabella is ready to finance Columbus's trips, she can go to the local bourgeoisie to finance that, right? The whole thing about her jewels, right? The jewels are collateral for the people who have the money, of the bourgeoisie. Within, what is that, 1492? Within 300 years, yeah, they're ready to take political power, primarily beginning with what's called here the American Revolution, War for Independence, and then more importantly, the French Revolution. As again, the bourgeoisie, these non-noble, non-aristocratic, but land-holding, banking, financing, emerging class is able to supplant, right, the traditional aristocracy. And then the French talk about the ancient regime, right, and now this is the new regime, the rule of the common man and woman. However, it's really the ownership class, the burghers. That capitalism, in order for capitalism to emerge, you need capital, right? To be a capitalist, you need capital. Where does the capital come from? There's a really great film that I apologize, can't remember the name of, but it's about the Brown family, from the Brown and Root and all those folks. One of the poor relatives of the Brown family decides to do an investigation about, well, where did our money come from? And of course it tracks back to the slave trade in Africa. The Marx writes about it, right? The primitive accumulation of capital how did they raise money that would eventually become industrial capital, finance capital, print capitalism, etc. The wiping out of folks in the Americas, the theft of land, and the hunting of black people, right, for the slave trade. So it is specifically the enslaving of Africans for multiple centuries and the depopulating of the Americas and the grabbing of these resources that funds capitalism, right? Its feet are always doused in the blood of millions, right? That is, and that never goes away because capitalism remains an exploitive process. Efficiency, right? How much labor can I get out of that body for as little as possible to make as much profit as possible? That I can reinvest, right, into more exploitation. And everything is for sale. I mean, they sold your mama. Everything is, and growth should be endless. We live with the consequences now as even the planet has gone into rebellion against capitalist modes of production. This history of modernity, it's the history of capitalism, it's the history of the nation state, modern slavery, modern genocide, and it all is, colonialism is part of its methodology. I disagree with V.I. Lenin when he writes that imperialism is the last stage of capitalism. Imperialism is implicated at the very beginnings of capitalism, right? As they are setting up colonies, settler colonies in the Americas, colonies in Africa. How did they get a hold of Africa? They got the coast first, right? They set up these ports, and we allowed them to set up these key ports, and then they just came inland from there after centuries of weakening Africa with depopulation. Dispossession is always an effect of colonialism, right? You come in, you take somebody else's land, you send them somewhere else if you don't kill them off, right? But it is essentially dispossessing. I like your hat, it's mine now, right? What you gonna do about it? Now you might do something about it, right? You might want to make me pay, but currently I have bigger guns, we might say, right? So this is where we want to actually get to today to begin talking about. So all of that was just to sort of bring us up to speed, because we haven't really talked about, well, then what is the African response? And if what we call micronationalism, which is what we've been dealing with, what are its advantages, what are its disadvantages, but what have we been dealing with to even get there? So that first bullet point up there, reunion of the black family, and I actually took that from a Facebook page, where it's actually reunion of the black family worldwide. And it's a sentiment, right? It's a notion that black people, people of African descent, have been scattered around the world. One of the interesting things about the ways we've been scattered, some of us are imperial armies. And in those imperial armies, we get sent to these other places where we find native black people, right? So I cannot remember the brother's name, an African-American poet was in World War II, stationed in the Solomon Islands, and lo and behold, you got all these black people in the Solomon Islands that look like they could be from the south side of Chicago or somewhere in Mississippi. So, he doesn't know they're there. And so the idea of the reunion of the black family, then it begins to take on more than just, the traditional, or this modern diaspora scattered since the time of Prince Henry of Navarre, to some of those even earlier migrations when we, by our own will, peopled the planet, and now we are finding each other. Particularly when we find that Europe, in its march around the world, has colonized these places also. Right? How long has it been going on? I don't know how many of you are familiar with what's called the Zanj Revolution. Is there another black one in there, do you think? Okay, we'll keep. Anybody heard of the Zion's Revolution? The Zion's Revolution, we're talking about the not the 900, the 890s of the Common Era. Zanj is, well, it's used in Persian to mean black, right? So it means the Black Revolution. And it was a successful slave revolt in what is now Basra, Iraq. And even though Africans weren't the only folks enslaved, they were the primary folks enslaved and led the rebellion, right? And they were able to live independently in Basra for several decades before being reconquered by the Caliphate. But what strikes me is it's the 800s, and we're already talking about black people needing to free themselves up out of slavery because folks are already being scattered. Zanj refers to what's now called the Swahili coast. There are a lot of speculation about the origins of the name Zanj. In Persian, it's supposed to mean stained, as in like a metallic stain. Notions about whether it was borrowed from Arabic or actually borrowed from Persian. But it's now believed to be an indigenous word, indigenous to East Africa, and coming from a word that means, we the people, more or less. And perhaps even more importantly, we the people of the skin is what it is thought to mean. And this version of it, Zanj, is a sort of a corruption of whatever the indigenous word is. Again, I'm just really wanting to point out how long this process has been going on of scattering black people out of Africa. And so this sense of needing to reunite, get back to Africa, or create Africa wherever we are. In the modern period, and really I'm skipping over a lot, Pan-Africanism, that term is coined in the late 19th century, turn of the 20th century. Primarily associated with Dr. Du Bois, Dr. W.E.B. Du Bois, but also Trinidad, Sylvester Williams, who convenes the first Pan-African Conference. However, prior to him, right, the 19th century, late 18th century, if it wasn't called Pan-Africanism, there were still these similar types of efforts, right? Black people reaching out to each other to aid each other in our common condition, right? Fighting against slavery, fighting against slave hunters. We've got the glorious victory of the people of Haiti, who sent the word out, hey, if you can get here, you're free, and if we can send aid to you, we will send aid to you. It isn't taught properly. The Mexican War for Independence, led by Africans. The African Mexicans, right? The Criollos, that is, the European descendant, they were fine, right? They were the ruling class. It was the Afro-Mestizo, Afro-Indian, Indian Mestizo Indians right on the bottom, and there was the Africans, as in most places, most agitated, fighting back, who led that revolution. Some of us are happy about finally getting a black president in the 21st century. Mexico had 2 black presidents, I think, before 1850, right? Before 1850 for sure, who eliminated slavery. People should remember when Santa Anna went into the Alamo, when he was, fighting against the Texas Republic, he was going to enforce Mexican law. Y'all got to give up your slaves if you want to live on Mexican territory. Those Americans, they like to call themselves Texans, they're slaves, and so they fought, right? Santa Anna was liberating, and you can bet there were black people in those forces also. But this is the untold story. Haiti offered help to Mexico on one condition. You're going to liberate the slaves. Haiti offered help to Simón Bolívar. What's the condition? Are you going to liberate the slaves? Paul Cuffey, shipping owner, right, ends up freeing himself, starts a shipping line, was one of the founders, or at least very instrumental, in the traditional black community that lives in Nova Scotia, Canada. The plan, instrumental in setting up Sierra Leone as a place for us to free ourselves from here and have a place in Africa to return to. This is prior to efforts around Liberia being set up. And I'm just trying to give some of the various examples. This is a very old sentiment. When David Walker writes his appeals very specifically is to the colored peoples of the world. Most specifically, those of you in the United States. Why? Because these are the most wicked of them all, is what he says. But he's real clear. It's to all y'all black folks in the world that are making these appeals. And he even anticipates some of the things that Garvey will be talking about later, that Elijah Muhammad will talk about later, as he questions the nature of these. That any number of individuals from the period, from the 19th century, what's his name? Martin Delany, right? And he writes the novel Blake. The idea of the novel Blake is really sort of a blueprint for how we could get free. The militant right wing in this country has used the Turner Diaries because they were written in that way. Here's a blueprint for how you can create the world you want. Well, that's what Martin Delany was doing with Blake. Many of us have read it. I bought it years ago, but I haven't read it yet.
How's it spelled?
B-L-A-K-E, Blake. It has a subtitle. I forget what the subtitle, but Martin Delany. One of the reasons it's hard, it's hard to find, and it is listed as a textbook, which makes it extra expensive, right? It discourages people reading it. But nonetheless, right, his idea, right, we can free ourselves here, find a space in the Caribbean, join our folks in the Caribbean or in Central America. The Maceo brothers from Cuba, right, involved in the Cuban War for Independence. When the first war for independence fails, they got to get, where do they go? They take refuge in Jamaica and are embraced by the local Jamaicans and continue to be here. People are still named Maceo, right, after the Maceo brothers. So again, I just want to indicate how old this sentiment is, and there have actually been, practical actions taken to affect some sort of idea of Pan-Africanism. By the time we get to the 20th century, the term is coined, and various sorts of efforts are underway to make it come into being. But there's, at least from my point of view, and I believe other people agree with it, with this, there's been a vagueness to it, though. Exactly what is Pan-Africanism? Is it a political ideology? Is it sort of a guiding principle for business among African descent people? Is it merely a cultural expression, or is it just this sort of common feeling that we belong to each other, but we really are all part of these other nations? And those answers remain, they really are still unanswered. We have lots of cultural expressions of Pan-Africanism. Our beloved Pan-African Film Festival, right, is one of those expressions, along with that same film festival in Burkina Faso. I think it's Festpaco, right, the Festival of Pan-African Culture. What's the O for? I forget what the O is for. But anyway, the Festival of Pan-African Culture, right, decades old now. For some people, that's what Pan-Africanism means, right, the sharing of culture, this notion of a common cultural grounding, the commonalities in our cuisines, our musics, our dances, but it has no real political meaning. But for somebody like Kwame Nkrumah, right? Dr. Kwame Nkrumah was very specific. The Organization of African Unity is a good idea, but we need to form the United States of Africa, right? A continental government, whether you want a government or a federated government, but one entity with one African army, one African currency, a central African government that can work on infrastructure for the continent, that can deal with these super states, right? With a United States, a European Union, an emerging China, an emerging India, rather than in these micro states, right? Where what can you have 2 million people. Yeah, you've got all this wealth, but you don't have enough people to really work the wealth. Right? What can you do in the face of 1 billion Chinese? One honored elder, honored ancestor, I should say, Dr. John Henry Clark. He puts it quite simply: Pan-Africanism or perish. Right? What other choice do we have? Again, in Pan-Africanism not meaning simply the unification of the continent, but the unification of the continent and the traditional diaspora. Kwame Nkrumah makes a comment about that at the founding conference of the OAU. This cannot truly be Pan-African if it does not engage all those Africans who were scattered to the Americas, and who are now in Europe, who were scattered to Asia. And so that has been the sentiment. African internationalism is a theory developed by the African People's Socialist Party, and really in response to the weaknesses of Pan-Africanism. Particularly Pan-Africanism's traditional, what they describe as petty bourgeois leadership and tendencies. A lot of the current leadership in Africa has claimed to be Pan-African for decades, but have been slow moving in making that operational in some kind of way. Now, part of the opposition to Nkrumah's call for, let's just unify now, was Nyerere, who's like, we need to be more incremental and think in terms of regional organization. And so that's the path that Africa has taken. So you have ECOWAS in the West, the Southern African community or something like that, economic community, an East African, a Horn of African community. Has that been effective, though? Has that allowed African nations, African people broadly, to get control of our economies? When efforts have been made to divorce African economies from Western economies, people get invaded. The case of Libya, Gaddafi's call for, again, an African currency, the African dinar, and Libya had the gold reserves to have that based on something, unlike the US dollar. It would actually be based on something. This is untenable, right? And you can't, what it would mean to the US dollar, people start trading, let's say, petroleum in African dinars instead of dollars. So they did not allow that to stand. What is this thing, the right, or not the right to protect, or the so-called humanitarian intervention excuse that they give. But this was also the case in Ivory Coast the same year, when the democratically elected president, the opposition disputed the election. The highest court in the Ivory Coast legitimized the election. Said, no, this is according to the rules of our law and the other election observers. This was completely democratic. But he wasn't France's man. And the reason he wasn't France's man is because part of the deal with the former French colonies is that all of their national wealth goes to the French bank rather than their own national bank. And Bongo was like, no more, right? We will have our own central bank, and the French weren't having that. So they set up, there's something anti-democratic about this, ignore the institutions of the country itself, invade, put their guy in office, and he's still there. Bongo was just recently let out of prison, and I think after several years of a campaign that he should not be in prison. But this is the issue of the microstate, right? That we have no resistance to these super states. And the African Union, again, this is why the African Internationalists so heavily critique Pan-Africanism. The African Union, insofar as it is a Pan-Africanist organization, utterly failed, right? First of all, South Africa could have stopped the whole thing by vetoing the vote when it was that year a member of the Security Council, and all it takes is one vote of the Security Council to veto anything. The U.S. does it all in favor of Israel. Russia and China did it the next time after Libya, so it wouldn't happen to Syria. Syria is getting its land back, right? They're winning the war. South Africa didn't step up. And then who came to Libya's defense? Nobody. I mean, right? The U.S. sells them weapons. They sell them weapons. They train those pilots. They didn't want to go up against NATO. It still hurts me, right? Every trip to South Africa a couple of years ago, and we were visiting. We were down at the Western Cape, and we passed this massive naval yard, and our tour guide was, this is the biggest naval yard. This is where the South African Navy is headquartered, and South Africa has the largest army on the African continent. It has dedicated itself now in the post-apartheid period to defending the African continent. It's like, well, where were you then? Why did you send those jets up to Libya? I mean, why did you might not even have to engage them because they might have been shocked that there was resistance at all. But that's not what happened. So the African Internationalists, that is at the heart of their critique. The petty bourgeois character of Pan-Africanism makes it useless. That what we need is a peasant and working class led movement, and that's African Internationalism. It is a theory of the world and history, and essentially saying that the European nation emerges out of what we had discussed previously, this stuff, right? The European nation emerges out of this, particularly suppressing the African and the Native American, remaking the African and Native American as dark-skinned Europeans. And as a result, the African nation also emerges, though. And that African nation is primarily peasant and working class. And even what we have that might be called a bourgeoisie isn't really a bourgeoisie. It is at best a petty bourgeoisie dependent on the international bourgeoisie, the truly owning class. But when we become the owners, that is when the means of production, including our human resources and our natural resources, are put back into the hands of the people, the working people, peasantry, everyday working people, not the PhDs and political types. Although that does not mean people who are live at a petty bourgeois standard, or have become professionals or whatever, can't commit class suicide, right? And join the peasantry and the working class. In fact, that's going to be necessary in order for us to win. We got plenty of examples of class suicide. Amilcar Cabral is committed class suicide. Frantz Fanon committed class suicide. I mean, I think you could even say Dr. King committed class suicide, right? Raised up in a petty bourgeois household in the South, but did not end up dying that way. I want to recommend that you visit the website, theburningspear.com. It is the website of the African People's Socialist Party and Internationalist Party, with branches all over the world. They have formed what they call the African Socialist International, which is made up of the various local parties. So there's the African People's Socialist Party USA, the African People's Socialist Party Caribbean, the African People's Socialist Party in the UK, the African People's Socialist Party Europe. There's a presence in Sierra Leone, in Kenya, in South Africa. There was a sister who was trying to do some recruiting in Egypt. I don't know if there's a party yet in Egypt, but I know she's heavily recruiting in Egypt. It's a lot harder to do that in Libya now, but that doesn't mean somebody isn't trying to do it. I know that there was a presence in the Bahamas, a presence in Colombia. Anyway, you can find out, right? You can go to the website and find out more about the African People's Socialist Party. One of our members, Sister Kay, she routinely sells the paper of the party, right? The Burning Spear, and then the website is the online version of that, and you can get a really thorough understanding. There are several videos and literature where, in particular, the chairman of the party, Omali Yeshitela, at length explains the theory of African internationalism. And as he likes to say, right, this is a theory of practice, not merely of the intellectual, but a theory of practice. You can't be an African internationalist if you aren't working to free black people globally. Birthplace and Birthright, which is the title of this whole thing, right? And, complicated by the idea of the nation state, and even the word nation, right? And in its root, it's the same root as natal and nativity, to be born somewhere. It's one of the things that marks the modern world from the ancient world. It didn't matter where you were born in the ancient world, right? You might have been born in what's today Libya, but you were still a Roman, or you were still a Greek. You were still a Phrygian, right? That being born in a place didn't change who you were, right? Because you still belong to this other community. But again, it begins to emerge in the 14th century. I don't even think that. 15th century. As the idea of the nation state begins to emerge, anybody born within its borders is either a subject of the king or the monarch, or has some claim to citizenship, or at least a discourse of rights, right, begins to emerge out of that. So it doesn't matter that that the English invade England, right? That before it's England, it's Britain. And the English come late, right? The Anglo-Saxons invade later. So it doesn't matter that you have the Anglo-Saxons over here, and the Welsh over here, and Cornish folks over here. And these folks all know each other, right? They know the difference between each other because they can recognize it in their names, right? Names are tribal names. They even know which of them are descendants of the Roman soldiers who left, right? Because of their names, where they lived, all these sorts of things. But all of that begins to be erased as a particular version of the English language begins to be privileged, and specifically that version of English that is spoken in the centers of power. Cambridge, Oxford, and London, right? And in that little triangle, this becomes the privileged English, and the English that gets printed, and the English of law and government, and etc., of institutions. And now you might be Welsh, you might even be an Italian Jew who had to escape Italy and his family has been living in England for however many generations, now you're all English, right? You're part of the British nation. In fact, you might not be English, you're British, right? You were born in Britain, you become part of the British nation. You might be Polish, but you were born in France, right? So you're part of the French nation. Ethnically Polish, but French nationality. Birthplace and birthright. That becomes important in terms of being able to secure rights, right? Some people don't get that even if they are born in the place. Some people remain outside for many years because of inherent racism and anti-Semitism. Didn't matter that you were a Jew, right? You were a Jew. Those Italian Jews I talked about, a lot of them ended up converting, right, so that they could become citizens. You have Poles and Russians who are coming into France. You have disputes over where France ends and Germany begins, right? So this area, Alsace-Lorraine, right, and it's a German-speaking region of France, but they're French, right? Because they're born within the borders defined by the nation state. You have people like the Romani, right, who are commonly called gypsies, citizens of no country, right? And people don't want them, right? They're considered dirty, thieves, etc. Too black. So birthplace and birthright, there is a struggle for some of these communities, right, to gain the rights of having been born there, right, to gain rights of citizenship. And that's, of course, really important for us here. This is, the importance of the 14th Amendment. Are we citizens of the United States, right? We were property of the United States, property of individuals of the United States. And even those of us who were not slaves couldn't exactly be described as free. Right, the 14th Amendment, if you're born in the United States, then you have the rights of citizenship, and that is written for us. But the question is, well, how well does it serve us? Has it outlived its usefulness to us? It was really important at the time. Does it maintain its value for us? And I think you have to be careful, right? Because you don't want to be given up rights. But then is it just a question of civil rights, national rights? Because there's that larger discourse of regardless if you are citizen or not a citizen, stateless or not, you have human rights. People like to think in the United States it's okay to treat prisoners any way you want. But prisoners have rights. We know there are a lot of innocent people in these jails, but there are some people who are really vile, horrible things in their prison. And they have human rights, right? They may have not treated other people humanely, but they still have human rights, right? And it might be the hardest thing for us, but it's supposed to be the difference, right? That we're able to respect those rights even when they haven't respected the rights of others. So, that's what we're trying to discuss today. Where are we on time? I think we're supposed to get to our break right about now before we get to the discussion.
Right on time.
Right. So that's this is all background. So we have this discussion, transnationalism, locals working with locals on a global scale. There's all sorts of that. Some of you might remember, have seen, or even have the bumper sticker. What is it? Think globally, act globally. Right? I mean, this is the basic idea. Mm-hmm. So the question is, when has or how has working locally, thinking globally, working globally, right? Globally. When has it served African communities here and other places? When has it served us? If it has served us well.
was a pause and resume. Okay, so we'll be back in 15.
Pause. Was there a pause? Yeah, I don't think.
I've seen it before.
Oh, well, you know what's cool? It's been going the whole time. Excellent.
Yeah.
Well, let's let people see these beautiful folks. I guess that's a little boring. It's all right. Let's look at what's outside. Mushroom and okra etouffee. It's completely vegan. Might be a little spicy, but I don't think so.
Who cooked it, you?
I think yes.
Like beans?
Oh, that I don't know. Ron, what kind of beans are those? Black beans.
You know,
That salad looks good too. See, let people see what we're eating.
I know.
Okay.
Yes, we got at least one person watching the food.
Right?
Yes. See, we got a little nice little slaw here. Some wait. Some little, what is that? Chips and hummus. Looking good. Mm-hmm.
I've never seen this shape.
Right? I know.
How'd you do it?
Make that announcement. What's the announcement?
I think they do this annually.
Yeah, yes. When is it?
November 27th.
Cool. Want that?
I was thinking maybe I should put it over my rice.
That's the,
Yeah.
what is that? The
Do the rice.
shrimp and mushroom etouffee. Yes, right. So that's got that rice, got the other rice.
Tummy.
And actually, well, got wild rice too, which of course I can
But it's
have.
probably not exactly. So it's perfect.
Yeah, and it takes forever to cook.
Not yet. So it may not be ready.
So we got some brown rice, some wild rice, yes, some black beans. This is a real nice African meal. Everlasting sense of time. Yes, music by Gil Scott and Brian Jackson. Ain't no such thing as a Superman. As a Superman. Ron, you going to read from Ma Rainey's Black Bottom?
Yeah.
That's great. You know, I'm about to read that for the first time this week because I'm teaching it Friday. I haven't had a chance to read it yet, but I'm reading it this week for sure because I got to teach it Friday instead of, because I usually teach, what is it, Joe Turner's Come and Gone. And I thought, you know, let me do another one because there's a few of his plays I'm familiar with, and that's one of them. So okay, it's Ma Rainey's turn. So that's a good sign.
That's a good sign.
That's so cool. Cool. So then I guess we start with the reading before, yes. So we're on it then.
Yeah.
All right, Rochelle. Rochelle's watching.
Yeah.
I don't want to bring you. I just wanted to wave. Did you wave?
Yeah, I did.
Okay.
And
Wave. There we go.
Billion is watching.
Okay. Is that who William Campbell is? Coolness. Okay. So let me
Did you get a lot of the stuff, the slides?
Yeah,
Yeah,
I
good.
focused on
How much do you pay her now?
Hmm?
How much do you pay her? How much do you pay Tasha now?
Oh, let's see,
But she's
10
good.
kisses.
Oh. Well, does she earn them already?
Oh my, yeah, she's
Okay.
more than earned it.
Thinking. What's in here, you said?
Water, just hot water for tea.
So I have to make my own. I'll just go to the juice.
And there's I guess there's no more no water left, or we used all that water. Oh, sorry. Cup, okay. Says, "Dang, as a Superman." Y'all should be getting hungry. Can fly like a bird in the sky. Yours, out of my mind, there ain't no. There ain't no Superman.
Thank you, sir. Thank you much. And this is, what is this? This brown rice?
This one over.
Okay. Look like without my glasses on, a combination. Very nice. Short grain?
Short.
Yeah. Betty. What dinner is which is okra, tomato, trying to get the seasoning, usually the shrimp used to be and Ron made black.
Did you say eat it?
Right. Okay.
Eat what?
Should I make this quick?
Yes.
Okay.
Are there any more of those bowls? Actually, no. Wait, yeah.
More of these?
Yeah, but no, actually, because I want some salad too.
Thanks for the call last,
Oops.
Oh, right, yeah.
but I was working until
Right.
3:30, so.
Right. Right, because we tried to do it extra early.
Right.
So Sister Kay could participate. And she did participate. She did. Yes, right.
Yeah.
All right, Kenneth Beavers is watching.
Good. Very good. Brother Kenny. I believe that's Brother Kenny.
That's for, what kind of chips are those?
Things you can't have. Are you interested in chips? It's not.
Because they're grains,
And that's
and
not.
I'm
It's not
grain-free, following the acupuncturist dietary, restrictions, which is fine. I mean, it got me my 20-year-old body back, or at least, my 20-year-old weight. There you go.
You know, I almost brought it.
Oh, dang, I knew. Well, you know what? Dollar Tree, for real quick, give it a minute.
This is true.
Yeah, for reals. Because that's because I looked at it and said, but wait a minute. Jabari,
This is true.
you ain't got no hot sauce hidden in the office?
No, I'm sorry. I don't even own any hot sauce, brother.
Oh,
What's
man.
wrong with you? You're not truly a black
I
man.
must be front end.
Don't eat peanuts.
Front man. You're not truly a
I
black man.
don't even own hot sauce.
This is one
one thing they haven't taken me off of, so I tried.
Right. Oh, I miss them too. I love some chips and
Oh,
salsa.
I do too. Oh, God, I do too.
I haven't found a good substitute yet.
I haven't either. Oh, my God. I haven't found a good substitute for most things that you use, you know.
Oh, don't worry, we didn't want any. No. We didn't. As long as you got yours, that's fine.
That's true. And the mushrooms.
That's cool. That's plenty.
Okay, look like these?
Yes. Little.
Sure.
That's a big. You know, that's a big plate for me.
Yes, I do. Okay, let me stop.
You want more salt? It doesn't have more salt.
Oh, okay. Okay. And usually I go light salt. Please. Please. In the etouffee, no, it's just mushrooms. Oyster mushrooms. As soon as you're ready, we'll get started, but take your time. Oh, come back. Razia. Have to wait. Oh, it's back. Okay, excellent. I believe, you believe, like I believe. Well, are you done? Are you done?
Done enough.
So, yeah,
Right. So anybody still watching, you're just chilling with us. Chilling with us, and we'll be starting up again soon. Delicious. Between the beans and the grain, it's just perfect, right? Wild rice, brown rice, we had everything needed. Everything needed. Black beans are delicious, Ron. It's hot sauce. He wasn't playing. Oh, I will. I will. When I go back to get a little bit more, I'm going to get some hot sauce. Thank you. Yeah. Mary Prater needs some hot sauce. Okay. Charger, honey?
I do, yes.
Okay. It needs to charge. Yeah. Okay. We're going to charge this baby. It's good. No, it's got. So it's nice and loose. Right on. Thank you. Thank you. Pray.
In his heart. Jesus don't love you. Jesus have your black. Come talking this shit to me, talking about burning in hell. God can kiss my ass. No. Let him go, slow drag. Let him go. Now, I'm going to give your God a chance. I'm going to give your God a chance. I'm going to give him a chance to save your black ass. Come on, Cutler, you hear me? I'm calling on Cutler God. Come on down here and save this nigga before I...
Insofar as transnationalism ignores the state, right? It's not state entities with each other, or even local citizens as representatives of their, but people working with each other across these borders. I mean, just simple as that. National just by necessity because the folks you're trying to work with on the other side of a border that's been set up. Nothing to do with the are represented or implicated, and in fact is often that he's in spite of the states on either side of any of the borders. So, the question is there. How is localism, is working locally and or globalism served African communities? Just trying to lay some groundwork. Ron, looked like you were about to say something.
The Cuban support of Angola, Congo, is working on a global level, and if I'm not mistaken, we have the soldiers Castro sent black.
I'm pretty sure. Yeah, as I recall, yes, they primarily, they wanted to recruit as many blacks as possible. And so they could best, part of that is fitting into, you can just slide on in, right, to society or go undercover, as it were, right? Not as Cuban, because you just look like the rest of the Africans. And I think a high number of and
we were given freedom to vote, well, freedom, laws were passed that allowed us to vote, go to Accommodations Act, ride the buses, before we were forced to spend our money with each other. This, unfortunately, Dr. Wilson, last name.
August? Amos.
Amos.
Rights era, or let's say the beginning of the unsegregated period, without an identity to take us beyond, agenda attached to that identity to take us beyond being able to mix in some way that we felt was more freely, with European Americans or whatnot, i.e. an African identity, in some ways our identity, at least in terms of how that discourse developed in the media, our identity is one of those reactionary identities, the whole concept of the non-white. You know what I'm saying? Yes, we're the other. Exactly, we're the other. We're the non-white, which is. So what happens when these superficial structures are removed? I think we became kind of, we don't really know what to do. By our reaction to oppression from the white majority of the state, what have you. So as we redefine ourselves, a value that we can get the most out of, where it's going to take us the most places. Which is, really, we are beginning to spill over into our discussion of the concept of American descendants of slavery and our descendants. So this is our official like coming up for us these days. How do I identify? Do I identify as, with this particular experience, or do we identify with our global African experience, the experience of African peoples across the globe? What's going to have the most value for us? And, though we in this room might have can assume, where we fall on the side of that question, it is, a huge question. And the more we understand about that, the more I think we'll be able to respond in a substantive manner to this question of, you know, is it going to be more valuable for us to be of slaves, or is it going to be more valuable to identify with the larger African family? So this is kind of the question that's on the floor.
Well,
Micronationalism.
Well, you know, you bring that up. Some of those other black nationalities emerge at the same time. I mean, there was no Jamaican nation until 1962 officially, right? I mean, there might have been an island, but people were wherever they were from, right? They were West Indian. I mean, there was no nation. And then now people have a Jamaican nationality after 19. They have a Nigerian nationality. So all of these various you know, a lot of people are at the time, and the, you know, the open and you know, critique of the U.S. as a settler colonial nation, a pirate nation. I mean, who would want to claim America, right? You know, an emerging Chicano movement, reclaiming land. I mean, again, we are in occupied Mexico, even occupied Aztlan. You know, Native American re-emerging, again, as kept, a current Hawaiian native, you know, getting back their land movement, Chamorros in Guam, you know, so there were enough people like, yeah, you know, after this American thing, you know, we can be something else. We can go somewhere else, we can, or just the black nation. You know, we're American, maybe the truest of Americans, and all this is sort of a new people, but you know, you're going to say something.
Yeah, I don't know. I keep, every time this subject comes up, my mind keeps going back to Amiri Baraka's poem, Why Is We Americans?
Why is we Americans?
Why are we Americans? And there's a brother who used to work for the Sentinel. He always said, like, you know, we are claim Africa, but Africa won't claim us.
Well, that's,
Some-
I mean, I just saw a little short documentary, Ghana, people home and a whole bunch of folks from here who were like, this was the best choice I ever made. So yeah, you've seen, some places.
Yeah.
I think if you end up, if you learn a local language or even one of the imperial languages, it just opens up communication. I think that makes a big difference too.
Speaking also with the communication, like you're talking about the transnationalism and the locals mixing up with the locals, that the being contained locally. But that's also something that's also always discussed, is that the disenfranchised whites don't realize that they're disenfranchised, that they don't, who share in the civil rights, but those who originally attended to, wealthy landowning white men. So the white women are by, so I don't know exactly what that means, but Anglo-Saxon Protestants. These are the folks.
Well, the Jewish women, females, themselves as a minority.
Well, absolutely. This.
So they benefited a lot.
Men are struggling to get into this civil recognition, is in this struggle for equality. So even that gets into this realm of where do we perceive ourselves to be. So if it's perception, you know what I mean? Also, what's the best perception for us? Because we've all had those conversations. You hear those conversations constantly. Those conversations have not gone anywhere. I am not an African. I am an American. I ain't no African. I'm gonna, what I'm saying? I ain't this. I ain't that. You know what I'm saying? From very young, from the
I'm Cuban, right.
So then I was thinking to myself, you know, Chinese endured a terrible period of becoming acquainted with this America. So did the Japanese, so did the Indians. But Black, they do not call themselves Asian American. They say I'm Asian, I'm Japanese, or I'm Chinese. However, my thought, the vitriolic type of slavery experience that we endured does set us apart distinctly from every other type of, you know, experience that people had in other segments of this American continent. For that reason, when I say I'm African American, it's because that identifying issue is I know what my great-great-great-great-grandparents experienced. I know it like no African person who comes and becomes American will ever know it. I don't think of it as saluting America. I think of it as this type of depravity. We have to, you know,
We had it a little better because it was cheaper to just import new Africans, right? Just people to death in the Caribbean, America, but you know, it costs more to bring people up here. So, you know, there was that level of you don't want to destroy your property, right? You want your property to be able to reproduce labor. So, enough, but don't work them to death, right? But you know, we were all treated cruelly. I mean, just absolutely chattel slavery, that same slave ship conditions. So these people are not so special. I mean, Americans are not the African there.
I don't want to have, for me, number one, if we say United States Africa, well, then does that mean that any African coming to America would then be a United States African?
Well, that would be up to them because they have their Nigerian. So they, people identify as Nigerian American, Ethiopian American.
Right.
Now, Nigerians marry us. Ethiopians marry us. Belizeans, we to mix and marry our families. Even there, it gets. I know for a fact that part of my family came over here from Haiti. It was a long while ago, but the distinct memory of it, and we know who they were. Now, I don't. I think we have forgotten that. We have all been subject to that propaganda.
Mm-hmm.
How does Fanon put it? Every black man knows that any one black man is every black man everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
So when they say, you're uncivilized, we know that's supposed to bounce back. And some of us, get nervous about it. Maybe it's a little true, right? That we begin to lead lie because we don't recognize civilization.
Mm-hmm.
Civilization has been described in a particular way. So if it doesn't look like Europe, if it doesn't look like stone cities, if it doesn't look like, but those were slave societies. If it doesn't look like that, it can't be civilization.
that we do. Okay? Matter of degree, but no one has that legacy because we are at the bottom register. It hasn't changed much. The time they defined that paradigm, they described Asians as being almost on a par with them. They described American Indians as being, the whole quote unquote noble savage identity. They, weren't exactly civilized or noble and this and whatever, all these different kinds of attending descriptions. And then the African, not the, but black and anti-Africanness as the justification for the systematic dispossession of, our labor, our wealth, our whatever our use is. Are you good? Are you ready to talk? Okay.
Well, I was just thinking that when the professor mentioned that his was from Haiti and that you know your, that is not indicative of most of us. Most Africans born in America and the most recent of us cannot go back, maybe on even now.
important definition, though, that you said.
What we
Joe.
have to remember, realize is when they took us off the land, they mixed our different tribes. They mixed us, you know.
But they were still Africans.
That's what I'm saying, but they, it's true they were African, but a lot of those tribes had their own individual language.
Right, right.
When you throw all that together and, you know, trying to build up the slave. You know, in our daily interactions, you know, with other people, I think that kind of like kind of change in terms of how we feel. I think we given too much power to, you know, the people who we say we feel are oppressing us, you know, because in that knowledge of who we are and in that recognition of our own power and what that power does when it's united, you know, makes a big difference in terms of the kind of, I think, the kind of actions that we take, you know, together. When you talk about local, how local impacts national and international, I think John Henry Clark said, you know, you can't.
Looking at it scientifically, this question of Africanness, yeah, we know everybody has come from the continent. Earlier, Bobby, everybody comes from the continent, you know. But, you know, we have this thing that we can do now, in particular, thanks to the work of two people I sorely cannot name now. I cannot name, I can see them, but the mitochondrial DNA piece, the brother who's a geneticist that developed so we can go, the reason why we can go and find out what group we come from on the continent. That, on a substantive level, go. Yes. Great.
Yeah.
You waiting for a result? You got them.
I got the results. I was trying to find my natural parents ran into
Yes.
a roadblock. And so
Yes.
somebody told me to just try my DNA. And so I sent it to, was it Ancestry?
Yes. Yes. Uh-huh.
And yeah, I got it. It's 25%.
You know who, and then there are those, a number of black comedians. Who else have I heard? What's his name? Hughley, who I enjoy.
Jermaine said that.
Jermaine. A lot of people will make that declaration.
Don't say anything to these people when they
Yes.
do this.
But
Even I'm watching the international news, and they get to the weather, and the guy from Japan says,
to it or some kind of particular energy about it. And I think what it is all of these particular situations are just that, particular. So yeah, they're unique in their own way. But in terms of how to gain a political advantage, do we really that we, as this minority population, say, for instance, in the polity that is called the United States, it's not, like I guess it's not as big as whatever is their popular food. You know what I'm saying? There's things that, whatever. There's certain things that are that are embedded in my imagination, watching American television. These are all these cultural impressions that make you a particular stream. But that, and I can agree with that. They have their place, but in terms of the relevance, in terms of how we can best gain, because we're talking about how to gain political
identify, you know, with the experience was. And then I think the other thing is that that it has to be those people who choose a more humanistic world. Because, like I said, you know, there's gonna be the greedy ones, you know, so have to, again, as we talk about it, because it's not just about
back like that.
I was there, I met two couples that my guest host introduced me to that was saying, we need African Americans to come here. They need our resources, they need our money. Because, you know, unfortunately, wear their native clothes, they wear European clothes.
Of course.
And that
Everybody
right
does,
there,
right.
that right there, you know, I mean, we are, so, but that right there
We're so deep.
is so much from their economy.
Right.
You
Oh
know,
my
just to
God.
make your own clothing.
Dutch
free of
wax,
charge.
guaranteed Dutch wax.
Yeah.
So was is fairly recent.
Recent.
In this last, 30, 40, 50, and purposely so, because they recognize the danger
That's
because it was effective in getting us at least to this level of independence.
Right.
So they, I want to say a couple more things, then we have to, well, this discussion because we want to bring Brother Jabari in. It is innate. It is innate human learning languages. Those Africans in the ships, if they couldn't talk to each other, a month is plenty of time to learn to talk to each other. And we know that we could talk to each other. There would have been tongues out. In this last 10 years, there's a lot of documentary research. We can, where we're from, we can actually go quite a ways back. It does take work, it does take time. These people keep records. Bills of sale. And of course, court records.
Right.
And of course, our own records. Getting copies of old Bibles in the family. But yeah, it can be certain.
One of my cousins
That's how we
actually did
learned
the
it.
research on my mother's side, and she went into the small southern places and looked at their files, their papers, and she bound it in
Right.
How wonderful. How incredible.
Some of you might go, it's only so far. Sometimes it depends on where you were from. You had an advantage. In the Louisiana territory, under the French, because it was Catholic, families weren't allowed to be broken up. Now, the Americans changed that as soon as they came in. But families weren't allowed to be broken up. And so it was easier to keep track of family records for folks with I like to say, modern roots in Louisiana. And then not just Louisiana, that whole Gulf Coast, so that, Mississippi and Alabama there also. Or so that would probably be the case in Florida also. Any said, you guys, you forgot the names and the legends, but you kept the culture, right? You kept the soul, right? You remained African. That's how I want to end, right? Genetically African, linguistically African, culturally African in so many ways. Not the Africans we were, but nobody is, right? After these 500 years, none of us are the Africans we were. You know, I'm comfortable with the term, New African that some people use, right? Because we aren't the same people, but we ain't anything else. I mean, we're, I may speak English, but I am not an Englishman. And I'm a U.S. citizen, but I'm not an American. I have none of the rights and privileges, as we've already talked about. But I'm a U.S. citizen. Defend my rights as such as tools for further liberation. Speaking of which, where can you have the biggest impact? Always locally, right? So we want to turn to the local African community and those we share it with.
Yes.
And Brother Jabari, you out there? Brother Jabari coming in? Is Jabari out there? Yeah, we want him. It's his turn. To bring us up to what's going on with the FIBA Center.
He went in that way. Yeah, I saw him pass that way.
And while we're waiting for him, is there any other local announcements, updates on